Ever try typing on your app only to have the keyboard rudely covering your input? In today's video, we are tackling that classic React Native struggle, making sure your keyboard behaves itself and your users can actually see what they're typing. Let's dive into the wild world of keyboard handling. Okay, so let's see the demo. As you can see here, I have three screens, one basic, one advanced with toolbar, and the other one just advanced. We're going to be tackling the classic example of the keyboard covering the input of a chat screen. So in this case, we're using the keyboard API that comes with React Native by default. And this is the result. As you can see, this works good. And we're going to learn how to do this as well on Android. We also have some buttons here that are accessing the keyboard events. We are going to learn about keyboard events as well. And this is how it looks. So as you can see, this works fine, but I still have to manually scroll every time that I focus the input, and we could like kind of work around this issue, but this is like the basic example. Now let's see the advanced example. In the advanced example, we're going to be using React Native Keyboard Controller, which is a very cool React Native library that you can integrate in your application. This library provides low-level API and native behavior so that you can integrate these kind of very native-like views. So for example, in this case, we are still focusing the input. And in this case, you can see that this is so much better because we are pushing the entire content up instead of having the user manually scrolling, right? And if you notice, when I drag down, this is dismissing the keyword. These are some properties that we can set in a flat list. And you're going to be surprised of how easy it is to integrate this. It's actually easier than using the keyboard API that comes with React Native. Okay, now let's see the final demo. This is going to be the classic form example. In many cases, you have like a form with many inputs, and having this toolbar that you can see here that allows the user to navigate between inputs, it's a great improvement in user experience. And you're going to be surprised how easy it's to integrate it with Keyboard Controller Library. We also have the Done Dismiss button. And yeah, we can navigate. And if you notice, as soon as I go at the bottom, it's going to disable this button without me doing anything. This is going to be automatically handled by the library. And of course, you can extend this as you want. You can change the components, you can change the UI. So this is the demo. If you're interested in learning how to fix this classic struggle of keyboard handling, keep watching, and now let's get started. So here we have the application. Let's go to the basic usage, which is going to contain just a basic UI of a chat application. And this chat application, as you can see here, if I toggle the keyboard in the input that it's at the bottom of the screen, by pressing Command K, we can toggle the keyboard, and as you can see, nothing is happening. So let's see how we can handle the keyboard avoiding view. And by the way, keyboard avoiding view is a component that comes with React Native by default. And this component is going to adjust its height based on the keyboard of the device. So this is really cool. And the way we can use it is by wrapping our view. So the way the UI is working right now, it's just a container view that is a safe area view. And then we have a flat list that is rendering the messages. And then we have a view with these two buttons that are not doing anything so far, well, by just dismissing the keyword, but I'm going to get into that in a moment. And then we also have the text input. So the way we can do that is by wrapping this view into the keyboard avoiding view component. And let me just go down here and I'll put it just before the text input, and let's hit save. Now, if I do that, as you can see, my input, it's gone now. Let's go back here and let's add a style, flex of one, and hit save, just like that. Okay, so now I'm closing my tag, keyboard avoiding view at the bottom. And let's see what happens now. I'm going to focus my input and nothing is happening yet. The reason for that is because the keyboard avoiding view component takes some properties. The property most important about keyboard avoiding view, I would say it's going to be behavior, which defines the specific behavior or the kind of configuration that we want to apply based on the platform. This is going to be different on each platform, iOS and Android. So we can validate this like the follow example. For example, we can check the platform, and if the platform is equal to iOS in this case, we would be using padding, which is usually what works best for iOS. And then for Android, this actually going to work a bit different. And I'm going to set this to undefined for now, because on Android, this will be handled automatically. So we don't have to do anything. So I'll go ahead and save, and let's go back to the app and check how this is working. So I don't know if you can see there, but we have some movement in the input, but it's not working completely. The reason for that is because we also need to add kind of like an offset for iOS. So we can have a offset, keyboard vertical offset is the right property. And at this point, I know that if I set this to 100, this will work. So let's go back to the device. And as you can see, now I'm able to push the input above the keyboard using this padding property. Now let's quickly see how this works with, let's say, position, for example. Now, as you can see, I don't see anymore the input. The reason for that is because now it's changing its position. I would say the recommended one is going to be padding. Now, the tricky part about this is that the offset is going to be hard-coded to 100. So at this point, you would have to check, if you are, for example, in an iPhone SE, which is a smaller screen, this will break. Another thing to notice, guys, is that right now I'm using a development build, which is basically building the native code, and this is working as it will work once I publish my application. But let's try to switch to Expo just to see if we have the same behavior. Okay, and now I'm opening the app. I will have some errors because I'm using keyboard controller library. I have it installed already, but if I dismiss just to show you this example that is only using the keyboard avoiding view from React Native, let's go to the basic example, and I'll be focusing the input again. Oops. Now, see what happens. We have a completely different behavior, and the reason for that is because at this point I'm using Expo Go, which is a sandbox application, and it's going to work a bit different than the release version, which is a development build. So I would encourage you to use the development build when you are using Keyboard Avoiding View. And also you are going to need as well a development build to use React Native Keyboard Controller, because that library requires native code that does not come with Expo Go. Okay, so now that being said, keep in mind that the behavior is going to be different. And if we change this to, I don't know, 80, and let's try again. Now it looks better, but as soon as I switch back to the development build, and let's go here in my device, I'll go back to the application and reload just to make sure that everything is working fine. If I go back to the basic example, you can see that now the keyboard, it's covering the input because this is working differently on a development build. So keep that in mind. I would encourage you to use development build most of the time. Okay, now I'm running this on Android and I want to show you the basic usage as well. So let's go here and let's focus the input. Now, as you can see, it's a bit different as well. And as I was saying before, usually undefined, it's going to work best for Android. Even if I disable these two properties, we are going to have the same behavior on Android. And if I focus, it kind of works right out of the box, but still it's coding a little bit of the text input, which is not great. And this is like the downside of using the keyboard avoiding view that comes with React Native, is that it kind of works for, for basic examples, and it can get you started very quickly, but you have to be configuring this kind of behaviors for a specific platform and then playing around with values. It would be nice if we can have something more, more standard that works seamlessly on iOS and Android. Now, one more thing that I want to mention about Android is that if you go to the app.json on this example code, you will find that I'm using the keyboard layout mode equal to pan. The reason for that is because you might notice that on Android, if you have some tabs in the screen, actually the keyboard avoiding view might be pushing bottom tabs above the keyboard as well, and that's like a strange behavior. So if you set this property in the app.json and then rebuild your application, you should be good to, don't take your bottom tabs and push them up as well, unless you want to do that as well. And this is how you can use keyboard avoiding view. Now let's move on to keyboard events. All right, so I'm back on the iOS simulator. I'm going to set this again to 100 just so that it's working on my screen. And let's see if I can focus the input, and it's working fine. Now, I want to touch a little bit on keyboard events. React Native comes with a keyword module, as you can see here, that I'm importing it already. And this keyword can be used to do many things, like, for example, dismissing the keyword. And you can check all the methods that you can access using the keyword just by pressing dot. And you can see that I have this add listener, dismiss, emit is visible, which is a whether the keyword is last known to be visible. And yeah, so we have these methods, and dismiss is going to be the most popular, I would say. So I think I can just call it like this. Dismiss when you press this button, which is a chevron down. Let's see if this works. This is the icon that I have here. So I'll press it, and the keyword is dismissed. So this is cool, but sometimes you may want to do something more complicated or apply some side effects when the user focuses the input, or when the keyword appears, or when the keyword hides. For example, let's say that we want to have this button to dismiss the keyword only when the keyword is active. So let's create a variable. I'll call this one is keyword visible, and then say set is keyword visible. I'm going to be using use state from React. So let's say use state. Okay, and I'm going to set this to be equal to false. This is going to be a Boolean variable, and I'm going to be setting this variable based on the keyword lifecycle. So to access these events from the keyword, we can add a listener by using the keyboard module. Let's create a use effect here. And this use effect is going to have, zero dependency. So I'm passing an empty array. And this use effect can be used to add these listeners to the keyword. So let's subscribe to the show keyword event. So I'm going to say show subscription equal to, and then we can say keyword, and then add listener, which is a method that is going to take an event type. If I open my quotes here, you can see that I can access these events. So the one that I want, it's the keyword did show, which is going to be triggered once the keyword shows. So let's go ahead and use this one. We need to pass a second parameter, which is going to be a listener. And this listener is a function that is going to handle the event once this event is triggered, right? So once the keyword is show, they are going to let me know, and I can call this function to do something. So let's go down here and create this function. So this function is called handle keyword show, and it's going to get the event, right? Now let's go ahead and copy the name of this function and just put it here. Okay, so now TypeScript is yelling at me because it's saying that this has any type. So if I hover over the add listener, you can see that the listener, it's going to return it's going to be of type keyword event listener. So let's go ahead and copy this type. I'm going to type this function like this, and let's import this from React Native. Okay, so now this knows that it's going to take a type of event keyword event. We could do that, or we can just type this manually in the event. But if we type the entire function, I think it's better. Cool. So now we are setting the keyword is visible variable once we triggered this. Also, you can access some properties from the event. Let's put it in the console just to see what kind of properties we are getting. Now, one more thing that I need to do here is add a return. And inside this return, what I want to do is remove the subscription that I'm generating once the component mounts, right? I want to remove this subscription in the case this component is unmounted. So we can do that inside this return by saying show description dot remove. This is good because if we don't do that, the listener is going to keep running in the background, even if we are not using this screen. So let's go ahead and hit save. And let me open the terminal down here, and I'll go ahead and focus the input. And as you can see, we get the event, which contains the duration, the animation, and some other properties. Now let me actually as well, every time that we, instead of printing the event, maybe I can say now console log is keyboard visible, and let me clean the terminal. I'll go ahead and dismiss and then show again. And as you can see at this point, this variable is equal to true. Now, to set this to equal to false, when we dismiss the keyboard or when the user closes the keyboard somehow, we can add another listener. So let's go ahead and duplicate this and change the event. At this point, it's going to be keyword did hide. And then let's just change the name of this to be hide show subscription, hide subscription. And it's going to be the same thing. But at this point, I need to create a new handler. So let's go ahead and copy the same one and say handle keyword hide. Okay, so it's going to be the same thing. Instead of putting this in the console, now that we know that this is working, I'll just set the variable equal to false. I'm not going to be using anything from the event, but if you need to do so, feel free to, just access the event, or even if you don't want it, just remove it from the function. But I'll just leave it. I think it's good. Okay, so we're setting this to false. Now let's add this handle keyword hide to the keyword hide subscription. And also we need to remove this subscription once the component unmounts. So let's call remove and hit save. Okay, so let me close the Explorer. Let me close the terminal. We are not using those for now. And now we can come down here and I have this chevron down, which is displaying, one every time, but now I only want to display it every time that the keyword is visible. So we can say if the keyword is visible, then only then show this pressable. So I can save this. And because the keyword is, as you can see there, I can put it up with the reference that I'm using here. By the way, I have to explain that in a moment. But once I press down, the icon disappears because we are using the subscription, which is great. It's a good use case. Now, let me as well explain a bit about this text input reference that I have in the text input down here. Basically, it's very simple. I'm creating a text input reference using the hook useRef from React, and I'm passing the type of text input. I'm initializing this to be null, but if we attach this reference to this input, then we can access some properties about the text input, like for example, focusing it. So I'm using the text input reference on this pressable, and when I press, I access the current instance of this reference, and then some of the methods like focus, for example. So we also have something like blur or clear timeout, and we have many things. You can learn more about this if you just go to the documentation or read the descriptions that you can see here. But for now, the most frequently one used, it's going to be focus. So once I press the chevron up, we are basically focusing the input, and we could have a specific validation, for example, that I want to show this only when the keyword is not visible. So let's see how this works. Now it's down and now it's up, which is a cool functionality, right? You are using the same variable, adding the event listeners. All right, and this is how you can use the keyword module that comes with React Native, as well as the keyboard avoiding view without installing any external libraries. As I mentioned before, this is great for prototyping, but if you're going to be building something more complicated and you really need something that feels native in both Android and iOS, I would recommend using React Native keyboard controller. So let's go ahead and see how we can use this library. The first thing to use React Native Keyboard Controller is going to be installing it. So you have to run npx install React Native Keyboard Controller. Keep in mind that you have to use a development build since Expo won't work with this library. Okay, once you install this dependency by running this command, I won't do that, but once you do that, you should be able to see that in the package JSON. So I have my React Native Keyboard Controller. Now we're going to be using some advanced features of this keyboard controller library. So you also need React Native Reanimated for those. Reanimated is actually a pair dependency that you need to install when you're using keyboard controller. So make sure that you have Reanimated in your application. Now the next thing before we can actually start using this library, it's going to be adding in the layout or in the entry point of your application, in this case, I'm using Expo Router, you need to add the keyboard provider, which is a provider that comes with React Native Keyboard Controller. This is the entire setup. And of course, if you were using Expo Go at this point, you would need to run npx expo per build to build your application on an iOS simulator or Android emulator. If you want to try this on a physical device, you could use EAS to build your application. So now that we have the library installed, let's go ahead and I move to my advanced toolbar example. So for the advanced toolbar, I think this is like before we dive into the more complicated example, I would say this is the easiest one because once we have the library installed, we can use components like keyboard aware scroll view and keyboard toolbar. So the keyboard aware scroll view might be one of the components that you're going to be using the most with keyboard controller library, because it's basically like the keyword avoiding view that comes with React Native. But this keyword aware scroll view, it's going to work out of the box for Android and iOS as well. So it's going to work the same and you won't have to do anything like platform specific configuration. So as you can see here, I have a bunch of inputs. This is a very simple screen and I have a bunch of inputs just to show you how this would look. And I'm wrapping these inputs in the keyboard aware scroll view. Now, if I go ahead and just comment this for a second, the keyboard scroll view, you notice that when I focus some of the inputs, I do have the tab bar, but if I focus at the bottom, nothing is happening. So if we simply add this component from the library, just like that, we have, this nice animation that is moving above the keyboard every time that we focus the input. Okay. Now we can also set some properties like, for example, bottom offset of 62. The reason why I'm setting this bottom offset is that if I dismiss the keyboard, you can see that if I focus the last one, I have like this, I have to scroll a little bit. The reason for that, it's because I'm using the keyboard controller, the keyboard toolbar down here. And this toolbar takes like 62 pixels. That's why I set bottom offset of 62. Now, if I set this to 62 again and then go back, you can see that when I focus the last input, it's working just great. Cool. Then I'm also passing, some container styling. This is like any other view. I'm just passing a gap between the inputs and this style that is going to take the entire screen and a margin bottom of 62. Other than that, these are just simple inputs. They don't have anything special. It's just a placeholder and a text input. And because we are using as well the keyboard toolbar, every time that I focus one of these inputs, I will have by default these navigation controls. This is great, and we don't have to do anything. Other than that, and this will work as well on Android the exact same way. But if you want to customize some of the things in here, you can access the properties. For example, if you want to change the content, this content is going to be a JSX element. So if you want to have like a custom toolbar, you can do so. Then you can access like the done text. If you want to change the done text, for example, this is a test and hit save. You can see that now on the right, we have this is a test. And when I press it, so we are going to dismiss it. So this is very extendable, very simple to use to get started. As you can see here, I didn't have to do anything else, just add the keyword aware scroll view, and that's it. But for some more advanced use cases or more specific things, if you need to access the events of the keyboard at each specific frame, you can also do that with keyboard controller library. Let's see how we can do that in the advanced screen. So I'll go to the advanced screen. All right, so let's go to the advanced screen. As you can see, I have my input and we have the same problem, right? Every time that I focus the input, we are covering the input. And yeah, that's not great. So at this point, you might be wondering, we can use the, if we go back to the advanced toolbar, we can use the keyboard aware scroll view and then fix this issue, right? So let's go ahead and try to do that. I'll wrap this into the keyboard aware scroll view from React Native Keyboard Controller. Let me put it all the way here. Now I have a warning. The reason for that is because I'm using a flat list. And this warning is telling me that you cannot have like a scroll view and then have a flat list, which is like a scroll view as well, right? Inside a keyword-aware scroll view. But let's ignore this warning for now. I'll provide a style of flex of 1 and hit save. And let's see if I can see my input at the bottom. So I see my input. Let me go ahead and bring the keyboard-aware scroll view all the way out of the view. Let's scroll down and focus on the input. And now this works. So if you wrap the keyboard-aware scroll view, maybe what we can do at this point is maybe just add let me focus on the input again. And this is working fine. From here, you can use the bottom offset, let's say 30, for example, and every time it's going to be working fine. Now this works great, and maybe this is like the fastest solution, but for some cases, you might need to do something more complicated or more custom for your screen depending on the keyword. For that, we can use some more advanced hooks. For example, I have imported here use keyword handler, which is a hook that allows you to access properties of the keyword at each frame. Let's say that we want to access the height of the keyword at each frame. Once the user focuses an input and the keyword starts animating up, this hook can provide the height like starting at 0 all the way at the max height of the keyword. So if you want to do something more complicated, or if you want to style depending on this keyword animation or keyword information, you can do so by using the keyword handler in companion with React Native for Animated. So let's see how we can do that. Down here, I have this function, which is a hook called use gradual animation. So the idea here is that I'm going to be accessing the height of the keyword as soon as the user focuses the input, okay? And then I will be saving this height that is going to be changing over time from 0 to the max height of the keyboard. And I'm going to store this variable using a use shared value hook from React Native for Animated. This is going to allow me to then use this value to animate something on the screen. Okay, and the use keyword controller handler can return events depending on the onMove or end. And by the way, we have to use this keyword worklet so that we don't get errors when we are running this logic here. So the only thing that this hook is doing is just saving the height at each frame of the keyword in this variable height. And as you can see here, I'm accessing the onMove, on end, and we also have on start, on interactive methods. And these methods will return events. So in the event, I'm accessing the height, but for example, you can also access the duration, the progress, or the target. So the height, it's very helpful in this case, because then I can save this height and use it in a style. Okay, so down here, I'm going to be using this hook by saying const height equal to use gradual animation, which is this hook. And then this height will help me to create an animated style that I will call fake view using use animated style from React Native for Animated. Okay, so what I'm doing here is just setting the height to be equal to the maximum absolute value of the height of this hook, okay? And by the way, when we are using reanimated, we need to access the value. When we're using a shared value, we need to access the value directly by saying dot value. Cool. And then I'm also adding a margin button based on the height. If the height is greater than 0, then I don't want to provide any margin bottom. And then otherwise, I want to provide a padding bottom. And the padding bottom is going to be 20, by the way. Now, this is one of the advantages that I was mentioning. This margin bottom can be changing based on the based on the height of the keyboard, which is really cool. Now let's go down here and add this fake view to an animated view using reanimated as well. I'm creating this view and just adding this style fake view. So what I'm doing with this, I'll go ahead and remove the keyword aware scroll view because we don't need it anymore. I will remove as well this fragment and put the text input just above the view, the animated view. So if I hit save, and if I go ahead and focus on the input, I don't know if you notice, but this feels more snappy, more native-like. And when I release, the input is not being, it is not set all the way down because I'm adding this padding bottom. And I personally like this approach the most. I think it looks cleaner just having this view instead of wrapping everything inside the keyboard aware scroll view. But I think it works fine as well. So anything that you need, if you in case you need something more complicated, this is how you can access this kind of events. Now, before we go, let's actually test this on the Android simulator. So I'll go to the advanced usage. And as you can see, I don't know if you noticed, but we do have the padding on Android. So if I change this to be 0, and let me reload this screen, hopefully we can see it. Let's go to the advanced usage. Now we don't have a padding, but if I change this to be 20, we do have a padding. Maybe you want to add this only for iOS, so we can use platform, OS, and if this is equal to iOS, then we can add the 20. Otherwise, maybe we can just leave 0 for Android devices, and this is going to work great. As soon as I focus this input, you can see that this works great. And the same exact behavior, which is something that I really like, the same exact behavior in both Android and iOS. And of course, I'm not using this, I think, on End. We can just leave it like that. And this is going to work just fine. This is just an example of how you can use the on end, but at this point, I think just having the on move is going to trigger the event and it's going to return 0 or the max height of the keyboard. And this keyword is going to be specific for each platform. Works great on Android and iOS. And from here, you can extend based on the platform, based on the style that you want to apply. And yeah, this works great on Android and iOS. So I'm super happy with this result. And I think we're going to wrap up the video here, guys. I hope you like it. I hope you learned something new. If you want to learn more about this library, we will leave some links in the guide, in the documentation of this guide. And yeah, don't forget to subscribe, like this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.